All right, favorite color, go.
Blue and purple.
That would be red.
I think pink. I'm
Really?
super girly for that.
And black.
No way.
Pink and black, it's too extreme.
That's
I
the
didn't even
most
know that you
basic colors.
How dare.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, two extremes. Pink and black.
Well, let me ask you this: there's a pink is very broad, so there's a lot of pinks. Cause I like pink too. There's a lot of dope pink colors.
Yeah.
Is there a specific like
Like a Pepto-Bismol, Bismol pink.
really?
Yeah.
Oh wow.
It's
really?
like my
Like
my
really?
girly
It's like
side.
a pasty pink.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I think for me it depends on the season, but if I can track it back all the way back, I will track it to the green Power Ranger. Like
So
that
green?
green.
Oh,
I
that's
like
cool.
green.
I like that.
I
I
like
like
the
green.
green.
You know
too.
what? I think that's a dope. That's yeah.
I feel like that transcends like many like seasons
Yeah.
and stuff like that.
That's true.
I like that.
That's my thoughts.
I like
Yeah,
it.
it's cool. I love that.
All right. Welcome to the Soul Tapes podcast. My name is Adam Cruz.
My name is Antonio Reyes.
I'm Vanessa Cruz.
I'm Gabby Reyes.
And we have a special episode today. We have invited our wives to be a part of this episode. Again, this is a new addition that we wanted to have a unique conversation today. Antonio, you brought up a conversation that I think would be very interesting for us to have.
Yeah.
A lot of great stories that we can share. And the topic specifically being on disappointment.
Yeah, how do you deal with disappointment? Because I feel like we live in a society where sometimes we can be a little fake about like encouragement and be this and thrive and like hustle and
Yeah.
that we don't know what to do when we are not in that place.
Yeah.
We don't have resources or people having the conversation of how do I deal when things don't go my way or things don't I can't take those steps to that place or whatever it is,
Yeah.
like how do I deal when I'm finding myself in that dark place of disappointment? How do I deal with my emotions? What are healthy steps that I should take? So I feel like all of us can share experiences, and I think that's kind of like the conversation with our wives. And
Yeah, I agree. I think that disappointment is a topic that we all can relate to. One thing that we kind of addressed earlier before we started recording was that there are different levels of disappointment.
Yep.
Gabby, you talked about that a little bit about how disappointment you can handle it differently depending on where it comes from.
Yeah.
Whether it's someone that you're very close to, a loved one, or maybe someone you're not so close to. So maybe we could start there. Maybe there's a certain situation or story where you can kind of share maybe a scenario where you were handled disappointment differently based on whether you were very close to someone or maybe someone that you were not.
Yeah, I think for me, there's been, obviously we've all experienced disappointments, but I think the one that I really had to heal from, and it was like one of the most significant disappointments in my life, has been something in regards to our relationship.
Yeah.
There was a point in our relationship where he was unfaithful to me. So obviously I was very disappointed and like struggling a lot through, like that feeling and stuff. But thanks to, other people's voices guiding me and counseling and stuff, I was able to heal from that disappointment. And because that was such a deep wound and that's something that I had to deal with that was so deep, other disappointments was easier to like cope with or heal from.
Yeah.
So I think once you've experienced a really deep disappointment and then you learn how to heal from that and go from there, then like you're able to, it kind of gives you like a starting point of other disappointments. Like, okay, like this is something that I can move forward from.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when you're like in middle school, high school age, where you kind of like get that situation where you might get your heart broken for the first time or something, and like a parent kind of like almost dismisses the hurt and pain because they're like, oh, what you're experiencing now like isn't even like relatable to the level of disappointment you might feel, right?
Yeah.
But in your scenario, like that is that situation where it's like, no, this is like the real stuff, right? This is where, you know, you're in a serious relationship and you find yourself in this moment where, you know, the disappointment is real. So I think that's a really honest and like real scenario.
And just to, I feel like it's important to point out, you know, like, she didn't cope with the disappointment as like, let's see what happens, you know, without doing anything about it. Which is, she was very intentional of the people that she involved in her healing process.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important because I feel like many times we think that by magic we could just gonna heal by it,
Right.
and we're gonna improve in growth. And I don't think that's the case. You know, you need wisdom, you need direction, you need perspective, you know, to help you get out of that place of disappointment. But I just wanted to point that out because it's very important.
Yeah,
That's good.
that's definitely true. What about you?
Well, no, I was just thinking from what Antonio said, I think ultimately it's first identifying those emotions. I think that's like the first step to like really growing, is that you have to identify like, man, like whether it's like I was disappointed or like that person hurt me. And then once you identify those emotions, you're then able to figure out, okay, how can I overcome this? So validating, yes, and normalizing our emotions is normal. Like it's normal to feel disappointed. It's part of life. But how do you manage those emotions to go about your day every single day? So I think that's like a huge part of like handling disappointment, is being able to identify it and then figure out what helps you like to cope, like what you shared, Gabby. Like how can you cope to get through it? Because ultimately it's going to happen again. Maybe not at that level, but it will happen. And so how are you going to respond to it when it does happen again?
Yeah, for sure. I think that there are different, you know, there are different disappointments that happen. It could be like within a relationship or even your own disappointments of like where your life is at, you know? And I know that, you know, there's been times where I'm like, man, I'm this old, like I'm this age, I'm supposed to be in this point in my life and I'm not. And you're disappointed. But I think the important thing is to move forward from there. Yeah. Like you said, identifying it. Because I've known a lot of people that have just stayed in that disappointment, you know, and then just live there. And they don't move forward from that.
Right.
Yeah, I think the thing with disappointment that we have to address is, where does that stem from? It stems from an expectation that you are assuming, or, you know, especially in your situation, like, you have a relationship and you're expecting that, hey, this relationship is going to stay within these boundaries. But that expectation ends up not being met for whatever reason. So same thing with, I expected that my life would be in a different situation than it is right now. And then you know, that's a very common scenario, you know, that you want to be, you know, married at a certain age. You get to that age and you're still single or whatever. And it's like, there's an expectation that you had that isn't being met now. And that then the product of that is you're disappointed. And that sounds very simple in like a formulaic situation, but the reality is that could stem, you know, and bring in a lot of hurt, right? So that's something that I think is really important, that we start to realize that we put on these expectations on our life, on relationships, which in a relationship actually that could be very valid, right? Like, hey, like I want to, you know, I want to have these parameters and things, but the realities of life is that a lot of times we don't. It's very difficult or very rare that we find ourselves in the situation where things are always picture perfect, right? So disappointment can, in the end, can be something that, even though it makes sense in our mind why we're disappointed, but at the same time, there's also validity to the fact that we also have to understand that disappointment is going to be a very normal thing that we're going to experience.
Yeah, completely. I think that, you know, sharing with we were talking before we jump into this conversation. I know that you guys have different experiences when it comes to disappointment. You guys mind sharing it? Like, maybe how do you guys deal with it, and what type of disappointment you guys deal with?
Yeah. Totally. What about you?
Well, for me, it's been so similar to what Gabby said, I mean, she alluded, it's something normal.
Yeah.
It's like at a certain age in your life, you feel like, okay, I should be here, I should be there. But for me, it has always been work. Like the way that I've always dreamt of working and what I've always, I think, just really wanted, I just always desired was to be successful.
Yeah.
And so, that's always been inside me. I mean, who doesn't want to be successful?
Yeah, of course.
Right? Totally.
So when I actually started, you know, I'm in full-time ministry. So I'm full-time youth pastor, and like that is my thing. I love it. It's great. However, like I've always had side gigs, like whether it's speaking, whether it's working on like other stuff in social work. And so the thing is that I've always had this tension of like, okay, like I think I kind of felt like I was trapped in this facade, or just maybe people made it seem like I can only do one or the other.
Yeah.
Or even further, like you can't be successful if you're in ministry.
Yeah.
And so I think early on in my years of work in ministry, I started to feel like disappointed because I'm like, God, I have this desire to be successful, but I obviously, I mean, I know I can't do it in ministry.
Yeah.
And that's not to say like successful can look different so many different ways.
Yeah, of course.
But anyways, I struggled with that tension of building wealth. That was like my biggest thing. How can I build wealth? Because I feel like I am created to do that. So how can I do that better? And so anyways, I found myself in a time where I really started to struggle with, okay, God, like I have this desire and I really want to do this, but at the same time, I'm feeling like I can't. And so I felt really disappointed. And to be honest, it was a disappointment of an expectation that I had created because of people around me.
Yeah.
No one ever told me that.
Yeah,
it's not like someone told me you can't be successful, Vanessa, or you can't build your wealth. If anything, I'm grateful that I have amazing people around my life that have taught me that it's okay to be successful and that to have and to build wealth.
Yeah.
And so it's not until now that I've been like, okay, I have to really own this. And so I think when I dealt with that, I was really, at one point I grieved it. I was like really sad. But now I'm at a place of like, wow, like this is exciting to think that wasn't what I wasn't limited to that disappointment. If anything, I think I had to come to terms with, okay, it's okay to do both and to be successful. And so that's kind of what happened to me. But I went through a lot of highs and lows. So I had moments where I was like so sad, and I would get sometimes angry at God.
Yeah.
Like, this isn't fair. I would get angry at Joseph for of like, this is crazy. I have to work so much. Like, it was just a lot. But ultimately, I come to terms with like, okay, like how can I cope with what I'm going through, but at the same time move forward and move towards the future.
And I think I remember like Gabby and I having a conversation with you, man, when we kind of barely met.
Yeah.
And talking about like coming into ministry, right? Coming into serving it under the church.
Yeah.
And I'm not quite sure if that was a reason why you
We
cried.
probably knew each other for like how long? A day?
Like a
week?
maybe.
Maybe a week, yeah.
A week?
And I remember being at Chick-fil-A,
Yes.
having a conversation, and you
Shout out to
cried.
Chick-fil-A.
Shout out to Chick-fil-A.
Hey, sponsor us.
Erica and Stefan, I believe in you.
And I remember seeing you cry, you know, but I was not sure if that was a reason, because you were in this crossroads, and this tension was like, I know I have to let go of this if I want to come into this, you know?
Yeah.
And I mean,
For sure, yeah. And I think that's how I handle disappointment a lot with crying.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like he sees it a lot. Like and that's when you know I'm truly disappointed. Like I go through these levels, like I get angry, I go off, I try to blame something. But then ultimately I'll just like quiet down and I start to cry. And I think that's when I realized, like, damn, it's deeper than just anger. I'm just disappointed. And so that's why I think what happened in Chick-fil-A. Because I was, like, disappointed in what you guys were telling me. And then also, like, God just kind of confirming, like, man, like, he is calling me to something that I don't want to do. But I'm going to step out and see what happens.
Yeah, and I think those moments, you know, it's funny because I always feel like, especially like when you have a relationship with God, and obviously your situation is very specific because it's more related to a life of ministry, right? It's not a career where you're, you know, the a lot of people go to careers because they're pursuing security, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a very common thing that, you know, especially in the Western world, in the U.S. especially, we desire that. But I think, you know, in these situations where you're a person who, and the thing is, in order for this story to make sense, people have to know who, like, more about you. Yeah. Like, you're a person who has ambition, you're hard work ethic. You're someone who's not afraid.
I'm a workaholic, you guys. I'll let you know right now. It's not good.
I mean, yeah, you know,
that's extreme.
That's extreme, but at the end of the day, you know, for you, it's not about that you don't have the ability. It's something you're not talented, but you don't have the skill. Yeah. And I think when you have someone like you who has a situation where God clearly has a calling over your life to do something of service to people, it can feel like the spectrum of what it looks like to have a life where you have security financially. It seems very limited. Yeah. And a lot of times people in your own world who all they know is that world is very limited, is that's what they put on you as well. Yeah. So you grow up with this mentality of thinking that your future is already set. Mm-hmm. That if you go this way, there's no way for you to live a life of security financially. Yeah. So I think what's great about living in 2021, living in a world where, you know, we have the internet, we have things that just have drastically changed what the world looked like 20, 30, 40 years ago. Now we have come to a place where I feel like God is challenging us to say, hey, if you're willing to, and especially, again, being specific to you and who you are, seeing your desires, but also saying, I've called you to a certain life, but that doesn't mean that I've limited what your life is going to look like to be this specific scenario. Yeah. So I think that's something that's important, is that we understand that what your desire, God is not neglecting that based on your calling. Yeah. And I think that's something that you were struggling with, was that you felt like your calling was limiting what else your life could look like in totality. Yeah. So I think that's something that's really important for us to understand, is that when you have desires and you're connected to God and you say, I want to do your will and I want to follow your calling for my life, right, I think it's important for us to understand that he's not neglecting the desires of your heart ultimately.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think that's key, no? And man, obviously we build these false expectations, you know, right, many times. It's like, at the end of the day, what he wants to offer us is what we really desire, what we really want, you know, and that can change many times. Yeah. I mean, I've seen it. I think even for my life, you know, being in a season of my life where I was pursuing something in a specific, and things were not going the way I wanted to, and specifically in ministry, you know. So I think I remember many times like having these moments of like, I mean, obviously when you lead people, there's always gonna be disappointments. Yeah. Right. You know, there's no other way around it. Like, yeah. I feel like when people are involved, it's always messy. Right. And I remember being in this place of my life, like, specifically one time when I was in, we were in Umami, and I think I was already in this place where things kind of accumulate in my life. And I remember just receiving a text. It was a text that one that just broke everything, you know? Yeah. That little text.
Off the edge.
Yeah, that little text. We were in the table, we were about to eat. This is before we got into the whole quarantine and pandemic and everything. And we were eating a burger, and I remember like just this text just messed everything up, and I just broke down. I was like, I'm done. I'm done, because I don't think this is worth it. This is not worth my life. This is not worth my marriage. This is not worth anything that I'm doing.
Like, he was legit sitting at Umami, like, crying.
I was like, bawling. I had
having a moment.
And not because the burgers were fire.
I know. Or those truffle fries and bombs.
I even feel bad for Gabby. I was like, man, they're going to think, like, I think they're going to think I'm crazy. I don't know what the heck is going on. But I think I was
Like,
so.
You're like, can I still eat this burger?
I was like,
Yeah.
check please to go.
Yeah, I think it was so emotional in that time that I was like, I'm done. And I have several
Yeah.
moments like that. And I think what obviously what matters at the end of the day, you know, like you were saying, Vanessa, you know, it's important for us to validate what we
Yeah.
fail. Like if we
Yes.
neglect it, it's just not gonna help us,
Right.
you know.
Yeah.
But I think the important thing is also how do we deal in moments like that? What do we do in a practicality, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
is kind of part of a conversation. How do we deal in those moments?
Yeah.
You know, what should we do, and probably we shouldn't
Yeah.
be doing.
Yeah.
You know, in moments like that, because obviously we are in a very emotional, dark place.
Yeah.
That if we
Yeah.
take very important decisions in that moment, it can hurt us in the long term. So
Right.
I don't know what your thoughts are, and when it comes down to those moments.
Yeah, I think for me, something that has been really important when it comes to disappointment is talking to someone about it.
Yeah.
I mean, I've had multiple people that I've talked about it.
Yeah.
Recently, you know, like this is just me being vulnerable. Like we've been struggling with fertility. So I've been open and I've had conversations with people like, you know, a counselor and like, you know, I've talked to you, Vanessa, about it and like other friends. And, you know, like it's you know, it's disappointing to like intentionally try to get pregnant and then like taking a birth control test and then
Yeah.
it say like, oh, negative, like you're not pregnant.
Yeah.
So I've been so lucky to have people in my life that like encourage me. Like
Right.
one of our friends, Maura, like she'll text and she'll be like, look, I just found this devotional about like infertility, like here, like, you know, encouraging
Yeah.
me. So like, and she didn't know, like I was like having a hard week about infertility. So it's like
Yeah.
being vulnerable and talking to people about like these things that constantly disappoint, like if you're in a season like constantly disappoint you, and then like have them speak back into your life and encourage you. So I think community is so important, like having people around you that are going to speak life into you, that are going to help you continue moving forward, because
Right.
disappointment can look, you know, different. It can look so different, but if you have people who are constantly encouraging you to keep on trying,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think is so important.
That's good.
It's good.
Yeah, I think, you know, I love that because I feel like,
Thanks for sharing that.
yeah, first,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing. You know, that's obviously, you know, personal and vulnerable. And that's what's beautiful about when you have people in your life that you can rely on, that you can trust and that you build a relationship with. And the fact that even in the situation where you're like, she doesn't even know that I had a hard week about this.
Yeah.
But the fact that you have people that are so selfless and loving enough to share something with you. And obviously you do life with her, right? But that's something that, you know, you start to realize that disappointment doesn't have to consume you. And that's the thing, is that, you know, oftentimes like with disappointment, when we find ourselves, we have standards that we have set in relationships with other people. It doesn't have to be with a significant other. It could just, it could even be just with friendships and things like that.
Yeah.
And we get standards that are not met. That is consuming, even if it's for a moment, where we're so like, I honestly, to me, I view disappointment like a traumatic experience. That's like what it is.
Yeah,
It's like we're
yeah.
literally
That's
going
true.
through a traumatic experience.
true.
Like, oh my gosh, this person let me down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's because we thought they never would.
Yeah.
And the funny thing to me about that is, why did we think that?
Wow.
I think it's because we desire that innately. And to
Yeah.
me, I always go back to this theory. Like, I truly believe as humans, we desire perfection. We desire to have a relationship with people where they're going to be perfect.
Yeah.
They're going to love us perfectly. But to me, I'm like, that concept is only set apart for God.
Yeah.
And when we put that standard on other people, we're going to be disappointed time and time again.
Yeah. That's
And
good.
so I think we have to realize, like, people are going to disappoint us.
Yeah.
It's going to happen.
Yeah.
But yes, that doesn't negate the trauma that we go through when we have this. But that's where I think grace is such a beautiful part of this, of disappointment.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that we have to understand that why is grace a concept? Because it's something that someone doesn't deserve.
Yeah.
But I think that at the same time, we have to realize, like, so we have to offer it. And I think as much as we have love and we have justice, because we want to justify situations and say, hey, you let me down.
Yeah.
I think grace has to be next up to say, hey, you know what? I understand that at the end of the day, there are reasons why sometimes we can't meet these standards that sometimes are put upon us.
Yeah, that's true. How about you, Vanessa? How do you feel like you deal with with moments like that? What do you do? What do you shouldn't be doing? In
Yeah,
moments like
so I shared earlier, like, my not so great way to do
Yeah,
it
yeah.
is like getting angry and trying to blame people.
Yeah,
it's
But
real.
usually I think that's real, because when we're disappointed, we kind of it's our way of neglecting what we're feeling. So we want to find a reason, or we want to blame something or blame someone on why it is we're feeling what we're feeling.
Yeah.
But I think I have learned, even just in general, like with relationships and in marriage, I have learned that, like, when I deal with disappointment, it's been a lot of understanding myself.
Yeah.
Like, man, it's a lot of false expectations, and it's a lot of, okay, why am I so hurt? Like, why am I feeling this way? And so what is going on in my life right now that I'm feeling so, like, constantly feeling like I'm failing?
Yeah.
Or someone's failing me. And so I think it's a lot of processing.
Yeah.
So something I've learned is that I do need to step away. So my personality type is that if I'm around someone, I'll just throw up. Like, I just want to say everything that comes to my mind because the person's there.
Yeah.
So my poor husband has probably experienced that more than he should. So I try. So I, like, even recently I realized, like, I need to just put myself in a room so that he doesn't get the worst of me, and so that I can just sit there and just get myself together and calm down and be really, like, okay, like, what's going on, and then eventually have the conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's the biggest thing about disappointment, especially with people you trust and love, is that when you're able to share what you're disappointed about. So even like what you shared, Gabby, something so personal, no one did that to you, but it's what you're going through, but you're sharing it with other people. So, like, for me, like, I shared it, then a couple days, like, recently, Joseph and I got into, like, a huge fight over me being disappointed.
Yeah.
And it was over something so basic of communication.
Yeah.
And so, sure enough, like, a couple days later, I'm like hanging out with people that I look up to, and I share really quickly, like, oh, like, you know, what I was going through, and just that in itself, like, made me feel better.
Wow.
And it was just so helpful, even though it's been, like, days later. I think sometimes it's okay to, like, take your time to process on your own, but eventually do talk to people. I think that's the biggest thing. So for me, it's not easy. Like, I'll be the first one to admit, like, it's not the easiest thing for me to kind of overcome, but I'm working on it, and I'm trying my best. But a lot of it has been, like, honestly, just knowing what works for you. So, like, for me, it is stepping away.
I think that's good, because obviously we're not trying to walk away from this idea of, like, you can take sovereign decisions in moments like that. I think emotions are all over the place, and we have to be honest about it. I think a couple days ago, well, actually last week, I think I was a little disappointed about a choice that I make. I was like, do I take the right choice? And I was in this very cloudy space that I was like, man, I don't know. Yeah. And I was very disappointed. You know, I was very disappointed. I was tired. I was exhausted. And then I feel like there's two things that work for me in moments like this. One is I need to do something physical. I need to do something physical. Either I go for a walk, I go exercise. I need to do something to release the tension that I'm feeling, and release the frustration, the irritation that I'm feeling, and just, you know, I need to do something physical so that I can think clearly. Right. And the other thing is, like, I feel like I don't want to take an important decision in that moment. Yeah. You know, based on how I feel, because I think many times we end up taking decisions based on impulse rather than be sober of, like, okay, I analyze everything, I evaluate everything. Yeah. And this decision I'm making, we tend to take very impulsive decisions. And I think in moments like that, don't take an impulsive decision. Just wait. Yeah. Just hold on. You know, yes, feel what you feel, go
Right.
through it, you know, acknowledge it, but don't take an important decision in that moment.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah,
wait.
that's so good.
Just wait until you talk to someone, until you have community,
Yeah.
until you release, you know, what you're feeling. Then you actually can take an important decision. I
Yeah.
think it's important.
Yeah, I think
good.
that's the hard part with like being disappointed is like, you know, your emotions play a big part of that.
Yeah.
But I was also thinking like, you don't want to live this life where everything is grim, where you think you're just waiting to be disappointed, right? There's like two extremes.
Yeah,
like
that's-
like you can live your life thinking, oh, I'm just waiting for the next thing to do. Like I've been in those moments where I'm like, I'm just waiting for the next phone call
Yes.
to come where
Oh.
something happens that hurts me, or you know, that's traumatic, or that's difficult to hear. Or it's like going through those emotional things where you're just like, oh, I'm assuming everything's gonna be perfect,
Yeah.
and then all of a sudden it's not.
Yeah.
And then so it's like those two extremes that we live in, where it's
Yeah.
like you can be very grim and just very, you know, dark, or you can be very oblivious and
Yeah.
ignorant to the fact that the reality of life is there is no such thing as perfection outside
Right.
of God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we have to find, and this is to me, honestly, the more we have these conversations, the more I realize like we try so hard to fix to find like a black and white scenario of every conversation, when the where we have to find ourselves landing is in the nuance and the gray of
Yeah.
life. And this is to me one of those situations where it's like, man, like you don't want to find yourself living in that bleak, you know, very depressing,
Yeah.
you know, scenario, but you don't also want to live in this oblivious, you know, fake perfection of
Yeah.
life. So how do you manage that? You know what I mean?
I think that's a very important question because, man, it's good that you brought that up because when with Gabby was sharing, you know, we're struggling with this process. She called me one day. I think there's moments when we call each other and say, hey, like, this is how I feel.
Yeah.
This is what I'm going through.
Yeah.
Either pray for me, you know, I just want you to be mindful of what I'm going through. And she called me. She was like, hey, can I call you? I called her and we were talking.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I told her is that I don't want you to live in that space. I don't want you to live in this space where you're only expecting the worst now. I want you to keep being hopeful and have that faith that, you know, it's not the end game yet.
Right.
You know, we haven't arrived to this place where there's no more hope. Because I feel like I had lived through that in the past 2, 3, 4 years where I put everything of who I am, and I know that somebody's going to fail me. Somebody's not going to show up.
Yeah.
Somebody's not going to do what they said they were going to do. Even though I'm putting the best of me in the line, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
I'd rather, even though it's painful, I'd rather live in the place where I'm like, I'm putting everything that I am, everything that my best hope, my faith into the line, rather than live in this cynical place of like, nah, it's just not gonna happen, or be negative about it. I'd rather push myself to be in this place where like, because this is where Jesus is calling me to live. Live in faith. Live in this place of love. Live in this place where you're hopeful, even though things don't go your way.
Yeah, and I think something that just to even call out, like if you are listening to this and you find yourself in a place of like you kind of relate to that, like, to what you just said, Tony, of like this idea of like everything that any person, any situation you come into it already knowing that someone's gonna fail you, someone's gonna just hurt you. I think that's a huge red flag personally. To know that you are in an unhealthy like place in your life, because that's already like that's a sign of burnout. That's a sign that you have been burned so many times that you've allowed that to define you and define your area of life right now. And so I think that's really important to take note of if that's where you're at, because it's happened to all of us. I know I've been in that place, and I've had to check myself and be like, if I'm thinking that of every situation and every person, that means I'm in an unhealthy place. It has nothing to do with everyone around me. It has everything to do with me. So I would say take note of that and take steps to like make sure that you get out of that, because it's being cynical is literally a symptom of burnout.
Yep.
So, hands
That's good.
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I remember feeling the same way.
Yeah.
And it was one day I was reading a book about leadership, and I was like, dude, I feel this that way.
Yeah.
I'm burnout. I'm like, I heard that word, but
Yeah,
I
it's
never.
me.
Yeah, like I heard that word, but I never really thought and processed about it.
Yeah.
And that's true. You know,
Yeah.
like, yeah, man,
Yeah.
like you have to protect your heart and your
Yeah.
soul. And
There's been so many times when I've heard people, say like, I don't get my hopes up. Like I have low
Right.
expectations because I don't want to be disappointed.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really tough place to be in. So I think like what you just said, Vanessa, is so key.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
exhausting. When
It
you really think
is.
about it, it's really exhausting for you to think so negatively over everything. And so to me, it's like, why make your life so much harder? Like just,
Yeah.
and that's not to ignore that there's people that you already know might not be the best people to like be around or
Yeah.
to share things with, because you already know the patterns of their lives.
Yeah.
So again, it's all about being aware
Yeah.
and being able to understand people and circumstances. However, that's not to say like you're not going to ever experience disappointment, because you will. But I think that's the beauty of living in intention, that you can live in disappointment, but also know that there's people that will constantly love you and challenge you, even in the midst of all of that.
Yeah, I think that's what's, what you just said right now is really important, because sometimes the reason why you're disappointed is because you want better for some people.
Yeah.
Like your expectations, sometimes our expectations are too high, like I was mentioning earlier, but sometimes they're not that high.
Yeah.
You just like, man, like I just want you to be a better person, and it's like, hey, like I just what the way I see you the way God created you, and that doesn't mean that you're to this high standard that's unachievable.
Yeah.
It just means, man, I just want you to be a person that is loving, is caring, and can really reflect those things.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where they're in that place of, man, I'm disappointed, but I think that there's we should also encourage people like, hey, don't lose hope in some of your friends and some of your family,
Yeah.
because you don't want to be in that place where you're allowing your disappointment to justify why I need to let go of that person, or not choose to love that person, or not choose to talk to that family member, because I already know the story that they're gonna give me. I already know where they're gonna go. No, let all of that go. It's like, hey, I see them the way God has created them, and I desire to continue to give them, again, that word grace, is say, hey, I just see something in you that maybe you're not actually exemplifying. So I just, we want to kind of identify those people in our life and say, hey, we want to continue to encourage them, even in the midst of being disappointed.
Yeah.
I think I'm sorry.
Go
Go for it. No, I was just saying, like, that's a beautiful conversation we're having right now, because yesterday I started reading like a devotional book, on prayer.
Yeah.
And the first prayer that it came into that I was reading, like it's reflecting on this idea of like, let the love be bigger and stronger than the fear of being hurt by caring for others.
It's so good.
That's good.
And
it.
to me it was like, oh my gosh, like that's so true. Like,
Right.
I think once you're burned out, because I experienced that, you hesitate.
Yeah.
You hesitate
Yeah.
on like, do I really want to do this?
It's a
'Cause I
defense
know.
mechanism.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what they were saying, like, no, allow the love be bigger and stronger than the
good.
fear to be hurt of like by caring for people.
Yeah.
And I think that was that's a prayer, like you
powerful, yeah.
even though it's a struggle, even
Yeah.
though it's like, where do we want to live?
Right.
Where do we want to habitate?
Yeah.
So I think that's a very
Yeah.
important thing.
I think that guarding your heart is so important. But I also think that whenever let's say you're like, well, I'm not going to have any expectations because I'm guarding my heart, or I'm not going to
Yeah.
get my hopes up because I'm guarding my heart. It can
Yeah.
also be
Right.
like, you're already speaking into disappointment.
Yeah,
right.
You're already like
Good.
setting yourself up for
Yeah.
disappointment. I know that I'm like super. You're gonna see how petty I am for this, but like, every year on my birthday, I'm like, I'm not gonna get my hopes up because like I'm not gonna expect a big thing because I'm just gonna be disappointed. I'm gonna cry. Every year, like I legit just cry over no reason, and then like he has like this big old like gesture for me, and I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. Like I thought you weren't gonna have anything from me. Like I was already setting myself up for failure, like for disappointment, you know.
Well, we're calling you every year, by the way. So,
but then it's like I was already putting myself in that place, and I was, you know, my intention was to guard my heart. But then it's like he had already something amazing planned for me, and I was just already in like this negative place because I was trying to guard myself. But it was like, no, I was already setting myself up for disappointment.
dude,
That's good. And you know what's
so
crazy is that, because I have friends that are very similar to that, and aka Gabby, I'm just kidding. I know. I have actually other good friends that are similar, and I think that's what's scary about being in that space is that then you're just constantly like, then if you're already there, then no matter what the other person does, you will constantly be disappointed.
yeah.
So then you're not open to receive. And so I think that's why and don't get me wrong, I'm speaking to the choir because I can get there sometimes, like, right?
Because it was like,
I'm definitely, like, I can definitely be in those spaces. And then I realize, like, then we're not really able to enjoy what people really do for us. And but because we've already put this, like, wall up, thinking we're guarding our heart, but it's really you just putting up a wall up. And now you're thinking, like, what is wrong with me? Like, for some reason, I'm unhappy. So then it goes even deeper because then you go, like, oh, I'm just so unhappy. But it's like, well, is it just that, or is there so much more? Is it because you have this wall that you're not allowing people to like speak into you or to love you or to remind you of who you are, your worth? And so then it becomes this like domino effect of like, then it's a deeper issue, you know? And so I think I think that's so real, and I think it happens to a lot of us, and we don't realize it. And I feel like the people closest to us and our loved ones then experience the worst of us, which sucks.
Yes,
that's true.
Yeah. I wanted to share kind of my personal perspective of disappointment because I think it's a little unique in the sense of, you know, we can find ourselves dealing with disappointment with relationships, even though they might be from a distance. So, you know, like for myself, like, you know, just to be honest as well, like I wish I had like a better relationship with like my brother. You know, for those that don't know, I have a twin brother. And it's easy to ignore because, you know, we have our own lives. Like, you know, I'm married. He's not, but he has his own life going on. And so, you know, when you go from a relationship where you're living together, you know, growing up together to, you know, me going to college and you know, then moving back home with my parents and all this scenario, you know, but then, you know, once I got married, I moved out again. And now it's like we're at a point where we don't have like the deepest of relationships, you know? But there's a lot of disappointment there for me personally when it comes to, man, I wish I had a, you know, more connected, more deeper relationship. But it's something that for me, I you know, we were having this conversation earlier. I'm like, man, I feel like I don't have a lot of disappointment in my life necessarily that I could quickly, you know, point out. But then when I start to think about it, it's like, you know, I'm very disappointed in this relationship. I wish it was deeper than it was. But the reality is some of our disappointments in our life become very easy to ignore because they're not right in our face every day. And I think we have those two scenarios where we have people who are face to face with their disappointment every day, and it becomes something that's so like constantly on the top of their mind. But then you have people like me where it's like, maybe it's not on the top of your mind every day, but it's still very much so something that you're dealing with and holding on to. So I think we have to be careful that we don't just dismiss it altogether, because then we start to ignore something that's very real and very honest, but it's just not something that's always in the forefront of our mind.
Yeah.
Right.
So
that's good, man. I think that's a great conversation to have, and I know that we can keep going.
Yeah.
I think, I don't know if any of you guys have your last thought that you want to communicate to the people that are watching us, but I think this is a very important conversation because it's not the same for all of us.
Right.
Like you share your unique experience,
Yeah.
all of us, and even the way we cope with it.
Yeah.
I hope that people can identify, that hopefully maybe you got something from Vanessa or Joseph or myself or Gabby, like it's a very uncomfortable place to live.
Yeah.
We cannot avoid them. That's the reality of it.
Yeah.
And I think obviously if you hear the common denominator in our lives, a lot has to do with our faith. A lot. It's the thing that pulls us out of this whole thing, But we hope that you guys understand and they can grasp a little bit of something of what we just talked about,
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, any closing thoughts that you guys have? You guys are quiet now.
That's your last thought. I'm just saying, you're a guest.
Yes.
Be my guest.
If you can give a last encouragement to someone struggling with disappointment, maybe they find themselves.
Okay. Yeah. My last thought would be, disappointment. To recognize disappointment, you have to get past all the symptoms of it, which is anger, frustration.
That's good.
Being irritable, like all those things are just symptoms of something deeper. And so I would even go as far as like, maybe you're like, oh, I don't think I'm disappointed. Maybe ask yourselves, like, is there some area in your life where it's always been like, you're just like, oh, I'm just angry or frustrated or irritable about situation. To dig a little deeper, because disappointment might be the root of it, and disappointment is because it's a very powerful thing. Like, it's really hard when someone tells you they're disappointed in you. That's way deeper than I'm mad at you. When you're disappointed in someone, it's a lot more thoughtful, and it's a lot more deeper, and it's a lot more like it's something like true to who, like something that you have.
It's an unmet standard.
It's unmet expectation that you
Yeah.
created, and you need to communicate. And so that's my final thought, just to kind of do like this life check of like, look at your symptoms, what are you going through, what are you experiencing, and then perhaps disappointment might be the root of one of those.
Yeah. I think that kind of going off of what you said, like if somebody's let's going into if somebody's disappointed in you, like, okay, just, yes, people are going to be disappointed in you, but just like take that, analyze it, like, okay, is this something that I really have to check, or is this just something like people expect from me that's really false and doesn't really apply to me? So if that, if you're in that scenario, just like check it, just be like, okay, like what can I grab from this and like maybe apply it to my life and just like work on, or like, like this is a false expectation for me, and just like put it to the side.
I think that's super key. I think that would be also my last thought. Like, I think we have lived to the standards of others for too many times, which causes us to be disappointed in ourselves because we feel we're not doing enough. So I think that's also a big thing. That's a whole part 2 of a conversation.
That's good.
That's it.
Yeah. No, and I'm not going to drag this on any longer, but I just think the ultimate like pinpoint in this conversation is grace. I mean, when we think about people and disappointment, it's graced for the fact that it's unfortunately the reality of our relationships, of the world that we live in, but find that grace, that love. When you truly have love for someone, there's a reason why forgiveness is a thing that we are called to continue to offer that to people. Don't allow people to suffer because they hurt you, because they disappointed you. Extend to them grace. Extend to them grace. So, like Antonio said,
There's grace for you too.
I appreciate you guys being a part of this episode. These are always some of our best episodes, and we love it. And we couldn't get to do this without you guys. So we love you guys, and we're if you enjoyed this podcast, you enjoyed this episode, share a comment, share a like, send it to a friend or someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe. And we'll see you guys next time. This is the Soul Tapes podcast.
And we out.
Yeah.
We kicked it every day, but now we barely checking in. I often wonder if I made the right decisions. Another year is passing by and now I really feel the distance. We still connect through all the likes and all the comments. Just showing face, but all we really do is watching.